I am a person who was born in the year 1968. That means I don't have to tell you my age. This video could be seen a decade from now and it would be still accurate about my age that day. You do the math. So, yeah, I'm over 50. And atmospheric nuclear weapons tests stopped 58 years ago, which means it stopped, if you're not aware of it, 1963. 5 years before I was born, atmospheric tests domestically in the United States on dirt or anywhere near it, which causes most of the dangerous kind of fallout to be able to go any distance. That went on for 18 years from 1945 when the first test was done. It had all ended 5 years before I was born. What is my risk as a person in his 50s? Now, a person 20 years ago would be asking the same question and have a very different answer. Underground or underwater nuclear weapons tests, some of which did produce fallout, I should mention. Obviously, water or being near it or being under it, and also underground, but not quite sealing it up enough, could cause fallout. But, well, I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem. They were used exclusively from 1963 to 2009, at least by the United States and other signatories for various things, correct? But that's 46 years where any leakage could happen, and to give you an idea, at the nuclear test site, or the Nevada test site, from 1945 to 2009, out of a total of 1,054 atom bomb tests by the United States, 1,021 of them, almost all of them, were in Nevada. And the rest were at various locations. And it did 921 of those underground, and 100 of them were atmospheric shots. Around 100, almost exactly 100. Well, we don't know the exact number. Why? Because, not because they haven't released information, it's because, or is it because they made bad records? It's because you don't trust the U.S. government to explain the United States government bombed its own population 100 times with atom bombs over a period of potentially 18 or almost 20 years. I'm adding another 2 years because underground tests that weren't deep enough released fallout. I don't give a shit if it's a tiny amount. And also I should point out that atmospheric tests down out of the ocean could drift over, so we're going to add a 2 years. So we're going to call it 20 years even though it isn't, just to be bitchy about it. Atmospheric tests are safer than anything near the ground, but the first tests were done way close to the ground. Dropping an atom bomb from high altitude and having the shockwave hit the ground exposes more radiation, prompt radiation over a larger area, but coming in contact with a gas like the air drops most heavy materials directly underneath, and, more importantly, releases more light materials like radioactive iodine. A large swath forms from every atom bomb blast. Not just because it spreads out by dilution, but spreading out by different isotopes being at different altitudes, literally acting like it's sifting them. These isotopes are caused by chemically pure and atomically pure elements being blasted for an instant to form hundreds of different atoms. They act like a little tiny supernova. It only produces certain varieties that we care about, like cesium, radioactive iodine, that sort of crap, but they do form. And they also form by interaction with the outside atmosphere, or dirt, depending on how high off the ground they were, and in some cases, both. And because of these different altitudes, these travel due to variations in wind speed and direction from the altitude. The jet stream does something different than local down at the ground levels. They spread it over very different pathways that are only predictable for a day, maybe. Which is the reason you have incidents where an atom bomb was set off when the breeze was going one way, but the fallout went the other way and it burned people directly over ocean. With, oh, by the way, a small amount of dirt underneath because the coral reef turned into the ground material that caused the fallout to be much more likely to fall in a way that is, you would think it would fall closer, but not really. Because of the type of atoms exposed, some of that stuff would mutate or convert into other elements, maybe. I mean, during an atom bomb blast, a lot of crap happens that we don't truly have the ability to track down. Underground explosions were better in that if they could be completely contained, you could choose to wait a year or two and then tunnel in and drill in core samples and figure out what formed at different layers and do it at different angles to figure out if gravity had any effect on it. That was part of the reason it was done. But that information is going to be hard to find because, if you're not aware of it, most atom bombs are detonated on purpose high above the ground where we have very predictable results. Shit hits the fan, but a lot of it dissipates rapidly. Radioactive iodines lose half of the atoms being radioactive in 8 days. That's a general rule. Every time you get a halving over 8 days, that's a binary division. One value. Divide by 2. The next day it's divide by 4. So every time it's another 8 days, you divide it again. So we go 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. 256, 512, 1024. After 10 half-lives, it's 1/1000th of the intensity. After 20 half-lives, it's 1/millionth. And because of radioactive iodine and its easily checked mechanical and atomic characteristics, after 20 divisions by half, or 20-fold reduction, that's what fold actually means, gentlemen and ladies, you have less of a problem. So 20 times 8. 160 days later, the radioactive iodine wasn't as big of a deal. But let's talk about that, let's say, 10 times 8. 1,024 divisions. 80 days. A couple of months later, after an atom bomb blast in Nevada, and the stuff is in the air because it's radioactive iodine. It can fly higher because it's lighter, maybe. We don't know. Studies have demonstrated leukemia and thyroid cancer radiation-related risks within a decade after the exposure, followed by increased risks of other solid tumors in later years. For the 20 years of 400,000 likely caused fatalities in the upper Midwest, extending all the way over to the eastern seaboard, that were caused by a combination of a high population density being near or being fed by an extensive dairy farming industry that absorbed fallout from the grass into the dairy cows, converted into the milk. Very far away from Nevada. Clear-cut, well-researched Cold War attack maps, most of them being propaganda-ish, if not complete propaganda. But I'm a prepper, what you guys call it now, but I was a survivalist when I was growing up. I grew up in Eastern Oregon. I'm a liberal from hell, obviously. But I'm a survivalist. Not a fucking wimpy prepper who expends a lot of effort basically doing what Mormons teach you to do, which is just be prepared for 1 year of shit hitting the fan, because it happens so often to that particular population. It became ingrained in their culture. Amish do the similar thing. Most people in the United States used to store things that way. That's what grain silos are about, partially. Now we use, or we did use, nuclear silos. Like that they use the same word. Very Midwest. We've forgotten what preparation and survivalism is. And then you've just spent the last over a year in a literal plague scenario. It's not a fucking scenario. This is what it looks like. If you're trying to keep the death rate low, this is the hellscape and the my freedoms you're going to have to deal with. You wear a fucking mask. You wear a mask if a nuclear bomb drops. You wear goggles. You wash yourself. If it's a plague, you wash your hands. And you wash yourself too once in a while. You wear masks. In a plague scenario, everybody is a carrier of disease. In a nuclear scenario, everyone's contaminated until tested. There are so many parallels here, I'm wondering what the fuck is wrong with all you asshats. I grew up understanding one rule that others and some of my neighbors wouldn't acknowledge. Your politics and your belief system are not going to keep you alive if you're dying from radiation. You can't pray away the rads. Well, you can't pray away the disease. You can't pray away any of it. You do what works. It doesn't matter if you like it. Why? Because you don't have a fucking choice. You put on the gas mask and the rubber fucking suit and the lead suit, depending on your location, and you go out and you scrounge. Fallout 4 isn't just a video game for me. I grew up learning that shit. And watching people bitch out on the internet because you're just so oversensitive. The melting snowflakes on the internet are amazing. I went to the dentist yesterday, and the biggest problem I had was the lidocaine or novocaine they gave me. I'm sure it's lidocaine these days, but I don't even know which one it is. The anesthesia they give to your jaw. It's always the worst part. Well, that and the leg cramp, which actually hurt more than the injection. The biggest problem was it took till noon today for me not to feel any of it. And I still have a sore muscle here because me clenching and not knowing my muscles are clenching is the reason I hurt my own jaw. The painkiller was a bigger problem than them drilling out the frickin' 2 molars. I didn't realize they were doing 2 molars. I thought they said only one little cavity. Well, for them it's easy because it was drill out the entirety of the tooth and rebuild it. That's actually easier than doing a small cavity up front, but only slightly easier. Kind of amazing. They had more work to do rebuilding a bicuspid up here. The rest of them are being pulled next. That's the end of the process. And bone inlays. And the bone inlay material has a higher likelihood of giving me radioactive cesium than my own bone. Because of where they get the material from. Whether it be coral reefs or cadavers. Baked cadaver, of course. I'm sure it's sterilized. Although my immune system couldn't give a shit. I was born in the era right after all of these atom bombs stopped going off in the air, but I inherited any genetic defects from my parents who lived through the bomb, as it is called. And also the Second World War. They saw the world change. And their genetics being altered ever so slightly might have contributed to my immune system being ridiculously good at fighting one thing, but not another. I have the immune system of a Neanderthal. Weak. Neanderthals were not tough. They just looked tough. When you try to look up a map where all of this fallout went, the U.S. government wouldn't treat it like a fallout map, even though it obviously is. Again, the radiation shit you're dealing with isn't fucking Fukushima or Chernobyl. It's the United States government bombed its own country. Because of a fucking war we never were going to have, we bombed ourselves. A lot like Failsafe, where in order to prevent an all-out nuclear war, the United States bombed New York City because we accidentally bombed a part of Russia. Kind of makes you wonder why we set off all the bombs on U.S. soil. Oh, that security thing. I gotta wonder if it was a deal. Kind of makes you have a nightmare sci-fi scenario right there. We are at the tail end of a biological war against a disease. That's how you treat a war with a disease. It should be a war. And some of you are draft dodgers and traitors. And you'll never live it down because over half the population knows it. And you know it too. I'm ashamed of all of you people who didn't fucking man up. But hey, now we have the maps finally built by a bunch of liberal peace lovers that show you where you might have gotten cancer from. If you're over 55, you're at risk. If you're not, you probably aren't. Or are you? Links below in the description. I wish you luck with this.